Alright, welcome back to another video. I hope you're all doing well, and today I've got something a little bit different. What I'm going to be doing is showing you the basics of FreeCAD. So following the recent changes to Fusion 360's license, I've had a lot of messages asking me what CAD package they should use and which one's the easiest and those kind of things. So my answer to that is FreeCAD. I'm going to go through and show you the basics of the environment, how to use the UI, how to set up a new project. We're going to look at sketching, extruding, cutting, filleting, and finally I'm going to show you how you can extrude for 3D printing. So let's get straight into it. First of all, this is where you can download FreeCAD. It's totally open source and it's supported for Windows, Mac and Linux. So make sure you go and download and install whichever version you need if you haven't already. One other thing I quickly want to show you is this really useful FreeCAD Wiki. If you've got any questions about FreeCAD or any of the features, everything you need to know is here. It tells you how to use all the tools, what they're for, and I 100% recommend you take a look at this page. So once you open FreeCAD, you're going to be greeted with something like this. And the first thing we want to do is create a new design. So we're going to click here, click this big plus button, and it takes us to this new empty workspace. The first thing worth mentioning here are the different workspaces available to you. If we come up to the top here, click this drop down, we have all these different workspaces available to us. And if you're just looking to design parts for 3D printing, 9 times out of 10 what you'll be sticking to are the part design workspace and the sketcher workspace. Chances are you won't really use more than that. So for this tutorial, the first thing we're going to do is switch to the part design workspace, as that's where you're going to spend most of your time. Before we do anything else, go up to edit, come down to preferences. This will open up a new window and you'll see we'll have different tabs you can click on here. We're just going to look at general and come over to units, and this is where you're going to set up whichever units you're comfortable using. If you click the drop down, you can see there's a ton of stuff in there. You've got imperial, metric and a bunch of others. I'm just going to click standard and I'm going to be using millimeters because that's what I like to use. If you've come from another CAD package, you might also want to have a look at the display options. You can select 3D navigation, you can choose controls from other packages like Blender, Revit. There's so many different settings in here you can play around with. I recommend having a look at them and adjusting them to your needs if necessary. Once you're done, hit OK and we're back to our part design workspace. Now notice when we change workspaces, we get a bunch of different tools available to us. So if we go back to the start workspace again, notice how this toolbar changes at the top. And this is really important because you need to get into the mindset that each workspace has different tools and you want to use them at different times. So we're going to click the drop down, we're going to come in to part design, and you'll see in here we have a bunch of different tools, and a lot of these tools are for 3D surfaces. Let's go back to part design and start our first sketch. So click the drop down, part design, we're back in here. Now if we take a look on the left, we've got these two tabs here. We've got model and tasks. If we click on model, this is our component tree. And if you've come from something like Fusion 360, or whether this is really new to you, I think you're going to be able to pick it up really easily. Notice in here we've got our application and it just says unnamed. What we need to do to change this is save our projects locally. And unlike other CAD packages, this is not cloud-based. You own all your files, you'll always keep them, and I think that's awesome. So what we're going to do is come up to File, Save, choose a directory, and I'm just going to give it a name. I'm going to call it Tutorial and hit Save. Once you've done that, you'll see your application name change, and now we're good to start modeling. So before you start modeling anything, the first thing we need to do is create a body. Each part is going to be its own body. Up on the toolbar here, you'll see an icon, create a new body and make it active. Create a new body. So you want to click this once. Once you've done that, notice on the component tree we've now got a new body in there with an origin. And notice the origin is kind of grayed out and you can't really see it. So if you click the origin and hit space on your keyboard, that shows and hides things inside of FreeCAD. So that's a really useful feature to know as well. We're going to leave it hidden for now because we don't really need to see it. Now it's time to create our first sketch. So to do that, up on the menu here at the top, you'll see this icon, and that is how you create a new sketch. We want to click that once, and notice now it's asking us to select a plane. Now there are 3 different planes available to us, but right now we can only see one. So now I can show you how you can move around and navigate your way around the workspace. So if you click the middle mouse wheel and just drag around, you'll see you can pan around the environment. But what is really handy to know is if you press Shift and your right mouse button, that's how you rotate around. And now you can see those 3 different planes in here, and we need to select one of them to sketch on. Me personally, I like sketching top down. So what I'm going to do is select this XY plane. So I'm going to select this plane, or you can click it on the left. Once you've selected whichever one you want to use, click OK. That'll give us a new sketch, and now we can start designing and sketching whatever we want on here. If we hit Shift and the right mouse button again, you can see we're rotating around. And say for example we were rotating it and we can't quite get it back to that flat view that we like. So notice up on the top right we've got this little cube. And this little cube makes it really easy for you to change the perspective on your design. So if we want to go back to that perfect top-down view, hover over the square, click top, and that'll take you straight back to that top-down view. You can also change it, so if you click one of the arrows, you can, nicely change that and get different perspectives. But we want to keep top-down view because that's the way I like to use it. You can also do this here on the top left. You have a bunch of shortcuts. You can set to front view, set to top view. There's a couple of ways of doing it, but I think that's something you really do need to know. Now that we're in our sketch, we're going to create a square. And you can easily create a square using the square or the rectangle tool, but we're not going to do that here because I want to talk to you about constraints and just how important they are. So what we're going to do instead is create 4 lines, and then we're going to use constraints to bring those lines together to create a square. So if we go up on the toolbar, click on the line tool. If you click anywhere and move your mouse across and click again, you create a line. In this case, I'm not going to do them straight because I want to show you the constraints. If we click again and create the other lines, nice and simple. And there we go. We now have 4 lines. Obviously that doesn't look like a very good square, but we're going to fix that using constraints. The first constraint we're going to look at is something called a coincident. A lot of people skip over constraints and they like to take shortcuts, but that is not the correct way to do it. Constraints are extremely important and they tend to always be the same in any CAD package. And if you can understand constraints and master this 2D workspace, then the 3D stuff really just becomes easy. And I promise you that. So what are constraints? Constraints are basically a set of rules for your designs to follow. And as I said, they're the same in almost all CAD packages. So if you're able to master them, you can jump between CAD packages really, really easily. Let's go up to the constraints menu here, and you'll see them towards the right. And the first one we've got here is a coincident. So we're going to click a coincident constraint. So what does this do? Basically, a coincident constraint allows us to select 2 points. So let's go and do that. We'll click this point here and this point here and watch what happens. They join together. They become coincident. So coincident joins 2 points to a single point, and that's important to remember. We can now do the same for all the other lines, so we're going to go ahead and do that. If we click this one and this one, they join together. If we click this one and this one, they become coincident. Same for this one. Click, click, they become coincident. Now our sketch is starting to look somewhat more like a square. It's not the best square I've ever seen, but we're going to fix that in a sec. So now that we've done our coincident constraint, we can look at some of the other constraints. And if you look at your sketch, you're probably wondering what these little lines are here. So these are constraints. Because these were created as straight lines, FreeCAD already knows that this is a perfectly vertical line and therefore applies a constraint automatically. And let's see what happens if we grab this point here and try and drag it around. Notice what happens. These lines here that are horizontal are adjusting and becoming diagonal, but the vertical line is staying perfectly straight, and that's because we have that constraint on it. If we click this little line and delete, we've now removed that constraint, and watch what happens when we drag this corner. You can see now they're both going diagonal. So you can see that constraints are just rules that the design is following. We can re-add that constraint back in using a vertical constraint here. So up again on the constraints menu, come to the vertical constraint, which is going to be this line here. We're going to click that once. You want to select which line you want to apply it to. We're going to click this one. And notice now that little symbol has appeared back there. And if we try and drag the corner again, it's obeying the rule that we've given it. Now because we're creating a square, we need to apply horizontal constraints as well to these lines. So the next constraint over is a horizontal one. So if we click that, we can now click on these horizontal lines. So we've made that straight and we've made that straight. So our design is now following these constraints. And if we click and drag the corner now, the lines are staying straight, but we're still able to move it and adjust these dimensions. And that's not good either. So what can we do about that? Well, a lot of people will say, right, I've got a square, I'm happy with this, I'm going to go and extrude it. Bad idea. Never do that in any CAD package. We always need to tell the CAD package about position and dimension. And currently we've done neither. We've set up our constraints, but FreeCAD doesn't know where this square is in relation to the origin of this workspace. And the origin of the workspace is always the center point. So you can see in the middle of this grid, we've got this little red circle. That's the center point. FreeCAD knows exactly where that is. So it makes sense that when we design something else, we always reference that center point. We need to give it a length so that we can't just freely adjust it like this. Again, we can use constraints to do that. So up on the constraints toolbar, there's a constraint here called fix the horizontal distance between 2 points. So if we click this, we look at one of our horizontal lines, in this case the top one, we select our first point and our second point, and it's asking us to enter a length. So I'm going to make this 50 millimeters. Hit OK, and notice it adjusts it for us. We can do the exact same for the vertical lines. So again, on the constraints menu, this time we're going to come to the next one over. Fix the vertical distance between 2 points on line ends. We're going to click that one. We'll use the line on the right here. We'll click the top point, the bottom point. It's going to ask us for another length. We'll put in 50 mil. OK. And there we go. We now have a square. One thing about these dimensions is that they can sometimes get in the way. It can be quite obstructive on your design, but you can easily move them just by clicking and dragging, and you can place them on the outside of wherever you're sketching, and that's typically what I like to do. Another thing that's useful to know is that if you've got a constraint selected and you see the little icon next to your cursor, if you hit escape on the keyboard, it'll deselect that and you'll be back to your regular cursor. Again, if we try and move this around, notice we're moving the square around, but we're not changing its dimensions, and that's because we've set up those constraints. The last thing we need to do is tell FreeCAD about position. It needs to know where this square is in the position of the sketch. And as I said before, we always use the center point as a reference. So we can once again use these dimension tools. So we're going to go up to the horizontal distance constraint, but this time we're going to select the center point that I talked about. So that's going to be our first point, and our second point is going to be one of the corners, and I'm going to go for this bottom right corner. And notice again it's asking us for a length, so I'm going to put in 25 mil because I want it to be dead center. So I'm going to hit OK. And that is now centered horizontally. And just to prove it, if I hit escape again and we try and move this around, notice I can move it vertically, but horizontally it's fixed because I've told it has to be 25 mil from the center point. Again, we can move this out of the way, move it down underneath, and it looks a lot cleaner. We're going to add in the final one, so we're going to go up to our vertical distance constraint, select our center point. I'm going to select the top left corner, and this time again 25 millimeters, and I'm going to hit OK. And there we go. You can see our square turns green, which means we've given it all the constraints, and FreeCAD knows about position and dimension. So we're now done in the sketch workspace and we can close it. So in order to do that, we can just click Update and click Close. And that'll take you right back to the part design workspace. And notice again, the tools at the top here have changed. And remember, that does happen as you change between different workspaces. In the center of the screen, we can see the sketch that we just created. And remember, we can pan around and rotate and do all that cool stuff. So in our component tree on sketch, we're going to right click, rename, we're going to call it square. We're now ready to extrude and create our first 3D object. So select your sketch here on the component tree, come up to the toolbar, and we want to click on this first yellow icon called pad. Padding is the same as extruding, it just has a slightly different name. So we're going to click on that once, and notice how that extrudes our 2D sketch into a 3D object. And we are going to give it a length. I want it to be a cube in this case, so I'm going to make this 50 mil. And hit OK. We've now got our first 3D object. How cool is that? Again, if you pay attention to the component tree, we can click this drop down on pad. We're going to rename pad, so we're going to right click on pad, rename, and call it cube. So let's say, for example, you've extruded and you think, oh, I want to make a change, I want to change a dimension. If you want to do that, it's super easy. Just come up to the square sketch and double click. That'll take you straight back to the Sketcher workspace. And say, for example, you wanted to change this 50 millimeters to 60 millimeters. Just double click on the dimension. It'll ask you to change it. enter in a new value, hit OK, and it'll update for you. And it's that simple. Remember, we can close and leave this workspace. Just hit update, close, we're back into our part design workspace. Now what I'm going to do is create a circular pocket on the very top of this cube. And to do that, we're going to have to create a new sketch. Now to create a sketch on the surface of an object, you first have to click on that surface. So I'm going to click on this very top surface here, and then we're going to come up to the tool menu and click on create a new sketch. That takes us straight to this view. We go to our top down view, and remember, if you hold shift and right click, you can rotate around. If you hold the middle mouse button, you can pan around. And if you want to return to that top down view, click the top button on that little cube in the top right, and boom, you're straight back here. First thing we're going to do here is create a circle. And up on the 2D sketch menu, this fourth icon across will let us create a circle. So we're going to click on that once, click anywhere on the screen, drag outwards, and click again. And that lets you create a circle. If we hit escape, we deselect the circle tool. Notice again, if we click on the edge of the circle, we can adjust its diameter, and we don't want to do that. Remember, it's bad. You need to specify the rules and tell FreeCAD about your dimensions and positions. So for this, we're going to add another constraint. If we come up to the constraints menu again, on the far right, you will see constrain an arc or a circle. If you can't quite see it, notice there's two little arrows here. If you click those, you can select additional constraints. We're going to select that tool, click on the edge of our circle, and it's going to ask us for a diameter. I'm going to enter 12.5 mil, hit OK, and there we go, it's adjusted it for us. So we've just told it about our dimension, we now need to tell it about our position. And with the circle, we only really have one point of reference, which is the center of the circle. And remember earlier I talked about the center point of our workspace, which is this point right in the middle. And remember, we have a coincident tool that brings 2 points together. So we can use coincident for this particular case. If we go up and grab the coincident tool, if we click on our center point and then the center of our circle, they'll snap together. You'll see it turn green, and FreeCAD's now happy. It knows where the circle is, it knows the diameter of the circle, all things are good. If we try and move or adjust the circle by clicking and dragging, notice it's not going anywhere, it's staying exactly in the middle. Again, we're done in this workspace, so we can update on the left and close, and we come back to our part design workspace. We're going to rename our sketch, so we'll come here, rename, we'll call it circle, hit enter. And now we're ready to create that pocket. Just like before, we have to select the sketch that we're going to use. So we're going to select circle. Up on the menu now, next to the yellow tools, you see this little blue one. It's called pocket. We're going to click that and create a pocket. And notice what it's done is it's created a cut into that cube. And again, we can set a length for this. So I'm going to set it to be 12.5 and hit OK. And there we go. We've now got a cube with a pocket cut into it, and that looks pretty cool. So just to make this look a little bit fancier, what we can do is round off these corners, and we're going to do that using a tool called the Fillet Tool. You'll see the Fillet Tool up here on the menu, which is this one, and it says make a fillet on an edge, face or body. And what I will say as well is that if you want to find out what all these tools do, just hover over each one and it'll give you a brief description. And then if you want to learn more, you can use that wiki. Have a look at the tool on the wiki and it'll tell you what you can use it for. So in order to use the Fillet Tool, we first have to select edges. So we're going to select the 4 corners of this cube. Now it's important that you hold down Control when you click each one, otherwise you only select one at a time. So we want to hold Control, click each edge, and remember you can rotate around using Shift and right click. So we're going to select each edge. We're now going to go up to the Fillet Tool, click that once, and notice it's rounded those edges off. And on the left we can set a radius, so I'm going to try maybe 10 mil. I'm really happy with that, so I'm going to hit OK. And there we go. We've rounded the edges on our cube, and I think it looks great for our first 3D model. You can pretty much use the Fillet Tool on any surface. You can use it on the edge of the circle, for example. So just to show you, if I click the edge of the circle, come up to fillet, you can use it there also. So we could try something like 2.5 and hit OK. And there we go. We've rounded off the edge of that circle as well. And that's basically it. That's all there is to it. If you've come from another CAD package, you'll probably be familiar with a lot of the things I'm saying, because it does cross over between all of them. It's always the same process where you go through, you create a sketch, you translate the sketch into the 3D workspace, and it's just this iterative process over and over again. That's as far as I'm going to go in this tutorial in terms of design, but I am going to follow this video up with kind of like a mini course where I go through a lot of other features in FreeCAD. I really hope a lot of you are going to find that useful. So what I'll do now is show you quickly how you can take something you've designed, export it as an STL so that you can 3D print it. It's really straightforward. So what you have to do first is select the part that you want to print. So in this case we're going to select this body, the whole thing. We're going to come up to File, Export, and you select the directory where you want the file to be. I'm going to call this tutorial. Click on the drop down where it says Save as Type. You want to find STL Mesh. And it's worth highlighting here as well just how many different file types you have available. There's even some Autodesk stuff in here. You've got step files, loads and loads of stuff that's really useful. But as I said, we want to select STL Mesh. I'm going to hit save, and that saves that out for us. And just to show you, if I open Prusa Slicer, I add a part. I'm going to select the part we just made. There it is on our heat bed. I'm going to hit slice. And that's it. It's that simple. That is now ready to be 3D printed. So I hope you found this really useful. My goal as always is to encourage and get as many people involved in CAD as possible. I believe that by teaching a lot of this FreeCAD stuff, I'm definitely going to be able to do that. So I hope you really do appreciate it. If you want to see more videos like this, make sure you subscribe. As I said, I'm going to follow this up with a lot more tutorials. If you want to request a tutorial, leave a comment below. As always, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.